Hello students, welcome back to the part 2 of French Revolution. Myself Rakesh from Pramati Hillview Academy. In the previous class we have understood with introduction part of French Revolution, which means we focused on the Bourbon family of France, Louis XVI and his way of administration, French society during 18th century. Today we are going to focus on how the outbreak of French Revolution, which means how the French Revolution began. Tithe and taille were the major tax were introduced in France, which means tithe means is a religious organization tax or it's a compulsory tax to the government. Taille was a direct land tax which has to be paid by the people. France people already facing many problems like shortage of food and high tax rate and drought conditions. In spite of this situation, tithe and taille added more burden. So people demanded for the general estate meeting for the discussion and finalize any rules and regulation for the nation. After a lot of pressure, Louis XVI called the general estate meeting. On 5th May 1789, after 175 years long gap, General Estate meeting was conducted by Louis XVI to discuss the issues of the nation. There was one odd system for each estate to accept the decision, but this time Third Estate did not get the proper response from First and Second Estate. They were highly humiliated by the First and Second Estate people. This made quit the General Estate meeting and gathered in tennis court. On 28th June 1789, Third Estate people gathered in tennis court and took the historical decision which will change the history of France. That was famously known as tennis court oath. Here one interesting fact was happened, which means the two special persons who felt very pity for the Third Estate, they decided to support the Third Estate people. They were Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès. Mirabeau and Abbé Sieyès, being the member of Second Estate, they showed much interest for Third Estate people. They also supported in framing the new constitution by the National Assembly leaders. After coming out from the General Estate meeting, the Third Estate took the major decisions. Like Third Estate will be renamed as National Assembly. New constitution will be framed by National Assembly. The powers of Louis XVI will be checked by the National Assembly leaders. This was the historical decision taken by the National Assembly leaders on tennis court. So this was popularly called as the tennis court oath in the history of France. At any cost, Louis XVI wanted back his full powers, so he gave a secret orders to arrest the National Assembly leaders who are busy in framing the new constitution for France. 14 July 1789, there was a rumor that Louis XVI by using the army will destroy the crops which are grown by the peasants. This enraged the people to react violently against Louis XVI by storming the Bastille prison. This was the turning point in the history of France that people turned against the royal family and demanded equal justice in the nation. 4th August 1789, finally Louis XVI recognized the National Assembly. National Assembly gave a remarkable decision in the history of France, which means the privileges which was enjoyed by First and Second Estate will be withdrawn. Also, abolishment of tax and feudal system which was introduced by the previous Louis families. France became a constitutional monarchy. National Assembly formed a new constitution in 1791. The main motive was to reduce the power of Louis XVI completely. Now, National Assembly decided to decentralize the power from one hand to three different institutions, which means legislature, executive and judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy nation. National Assembly also classified the people into two categories: active citizens, passive citizens. Active citizens had a right to vote. Minimum age was 25 years. 3 days wages is equal to the tax. System was totally different. The people who are able to pay the 3 days his wages can be considered the active citizens. On the other hand, passive citizens, these people doesn't have the right to vote. Women and children also who are below 25 years comes under these passive citizens. These people doesn't have any voting power. Through the National Assembly, French people got right to life, freedom of speech, equality before law. 1791 National Assembly completely framed the new constitution for France, also gave all political rights, but here priority was given to rich people only. This made to start many political clubs in France, in that the Jacobean club was so important. Jacobean club consisted of poor people like servants, shopkeepers and other middle class people. The leader of this club was Maximilian Robespierre. 10th August 1792 Jacobeans attacked King's Palace and arrested Louis XVI. National Assembly declared life imprisonment to the entire royal family, and this gave a new chance to the France people to select their own leaders, which means the new election system was introduced. Now the voting age was reduced to 21 from 25. Newly elected assembly, called as convention, declared the two major decisions. On 21st September 1792, France abolished monarchy and declared as republican nation. The newly elected government called convention the death sentence to the Louis XVI in the year of 1793, 21st January. Louis XVI was publicly hanged. On the same year, on 16th October 1793, even Marie Antoinette was hanged by the same machine called guillotine machine. The reign of terror 1793-94. These years was considered as the period of terror in the history of France because due to the Maximilian Robespierre, which means Maximilian Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. All those who he saw as being enemies of Republic, those who against of Jacobean Club and other political parties, even his own party members who did not agree with his method were arrested, imprisoned and then tried to be a revolutionary tribunal. If the court found them guilty, they were guillotined. The guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded. It was named after Dr. Guillotine, who invented it. Maximilian Robespierre also made several changes in the administration of France. Maximum ceiling on wages and price was reduced. Expansion of wheat flour was banned. Replaced few words in a dictionary means Monsieur's and Madam. Church buildings were converted into soldiers' camp and other government buildings. The aggressive nature of Maximilian Robespierre was not tolerated by the other members of the Jacobean Club. Even French people was really horrified with the conditions in the time of the Jacobean ruler, especially by Maximilian Robespierre. Now, the people of France revolted against the Maximilian Robespierre himself and declared the death sentence as he was giving to the other people. Finally, Maximilian Robespierre was hanged in the same machine, guillotine, on 1794 July month. Directory rules France. The fall of Jacobean government allowed the wealthier middle classes to seize power. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-propertied sections of society. It provided the two elected legislative council. These then appointed a directory, an executive made up of 5 members. This was meant as a safeguard against the concentration of power in one-man executive as under the Jacobean. But the members of directorates itself started to fight for more powers. This made the political instability in France and led to the entry of the military general of France army called Napoleon Bonaparte to interfere in the matters of France. Through all these changes in the form of government, the ideals of freedom, of equality before the law and fraternity remain inspiring ideas that motivated political movements in France and the rest of Europe during the following century. From the very beginning, women were active participants in the events which brought about so many important changes in French society. They hoped that their involvement would pressurize the revolutionary government to introduce measures to improve their lives. Most of the women of the Third Estate had to work for a living. They worked as seamstresses or laundresses, sold flowers, fruits and vegetables at the market, or were employed as domestic servants in the houses of prosperous people. Most women did not have access to education or job training. Only daughters of nobles or wealthier members of the Third Estate could study at a convent after which their families arranged a marriage for them. Working women had also to care their families, that is, cook, fetch the water, queue up for bread, and look after their children. Their wages were lower than even of men. In order to discuss and voice their interest, women started their own political clubs and newspapers. About 60 women's clubs came up in different French cities. The Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women was the most famous of them. One of their main demands was that women enjoy the same political rights as men. Women were disappointed that the Constitution of 1791 reduced them to passive citizens. They demanded the right to vote, to be elected the assembly, and to hold political office. Only then they felt would their interest be represented in the new government. Women's struggle for equal political rights even continued during the Reign of Terror. The new government issued laws ordering closure of women clubs and banning their political activities. Many prominent women were arrested and a number of them executed. The greatest women revolutionary leaders of France was Olympia de Gouges. She wrote a Declaration of Rights of Women and Citizens where she addressed to the dignity of women in the French society and demanded equal rights and opportunities as men in France. But the Jacobean government forced many women clubs to shut down. She was tried by the National Convention, which charged was executed by the guillotine machine. In the early years, the revolutionary government did introduce laws that helped improve the lives of women. Together with the creation of state schools made compulsory for all girls. Their fathers could not force their daughters to marriage against their wish. Marriage was made into a contract entered into freely and registered under civil law. Divorce made legal and could be applied for both men and women. Women could now train for jobs, could become artists or run small-scale industry. The abolition of slavery. One of the most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobean Club was the abolition of slavery in French colonies. The colonies in Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe and San Domingo were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar and coffee. From this started a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa and the Americans. The slave trade began in the 17th century. French merchants sailed from ports of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast where they bought slaves from local chieftains. Branded and shackled, the slaves were packed tightly into the ships for a 3-month-long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. There they were sold to the plantation owners. The exploitation of slaves' labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in European markets for sugar, coffee and indigo. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. Throughout the 18th century, there was a little criticism of slavery in France. The National Assembly held long debates about whether the rights of man should be extended to all French subjects, including those in the colonies, but did not pass any such laws, fearing the opposition from businessmen whose income depended on the slave trade. It was finally the Convention which in 1794 introduced a special law to free all slaves in the French overseas colonies. This, however, turned out to be a short-term measure. 10 years later, Napoleon Bonaparte reintroduced slavery. Plantation owners understood their freedom as including the right of enslaved African Negroes in pursuit of their economic interest. Slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in 1848. The Revolution and everyday life. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. In the old regime, all written material and cultural activities, books, newspapers, plays could be published or performed only after they had been approved by the censors of the king. Now, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. Newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded to the towns of France from where they traveled rapidly into the countryside. They all described and discussed the events and changes taking place in France. Freedom of the press also meant that opposing views of events could be expressed. Each Each side sought to convince the others as its position through the medium of print. Plays, songs, and festive processions attracted large number of people. This was the way they could grasp and identify which ideas such as liberty or justice that political philosophers wrote about length in text which only a handful of educated people could read, because during 17th and 18th century the literacy rate of Europe was comparatively low. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769 in Ajaccio on the Mediterranean island of Corsica. After his education, he shifted to France for military training. Later, he joined the French army as soldier. Very soon, through his military skills, got promotions quickly. At a very young age itself, he was the military general of French army. His interfering in the matters of France was a turning point in the history of entire Europe. Very quickly, he took the whole administration under his control. In 1804, he crowned himself as the new emperor of France and declared his new rules in France under the name of Napoleonic Code. Through his Code of Napoleon changed the entire French administration. Uniform system in the nation was introduced, education became compulsory, banks were nationalized, gave more importance to the expansion of French territories through wars. He was unstoppable until 1812. In the same year, he attacked on Russia, but due to the extreme cold conditions and lack of food supply, French army was failed to face the Russian army. After Russia, now the French army turned towards Portuguese and Spain, but here also French army lost to the Allies led by Arthur Wellesley or Duke of Wellington. By 1814, Napoleon was totally defeated and expelled to the tiny island of Elba with a small army. Louis XVIII, the brother of Louis XVI, became the new king of France. 1815, April, Napoleon escaped from Elba and reached the borders of France. Very soon, Napoleon reached France and took the charge of kingdom again. 1815, June 18th. This was the most important day for France, especially Napoleon Bonaparte, because against France there were 7 countries led by Wellington. These were England, Netherlands, Hanover, Nassau, Brunswick, and Prussia. These nations declared war against Napoleon Bonaparte. This was the historical battle of France, that was the Battle of Waterloo. Battle of Waterloo. This was the most iconic battle of 18th century because this was the last battle of the French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. In the previous, he personally leading the army, but here in this Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon had a health issue, so he decided to handle the sequence with his military generals. So under the able military general, French army faced the Arthur Wellesley or Duke of Wellington allied nations on the battlefield of Waterloo. Here, Wellington chose the perfect place called Waterloo because he knew the French army strength, especially they are very powerful in the terrain battlefield. So, Wellington chose the hilly region, which made the French army to suffer a quite difficulty while climbing the mountain regions. So this was the turning point in the Battle of Waterloo. In spite of all the efforts of generals of French army, the French army was trapped by Wellington's extraordinary plan. Especially the box formation of Allied nation trapped the French army completely. Thus, after 12 years of long ruling in France, the Napoleon Bonaparte has been arrested by the Allied nation under Duke of Wellington. So let's recall what we have learned today. In this session, we have discussed with the outbreak of French Revolution, which means how the French Revolution was began, role of women in the French Revolution, everyday life during the Revolution time, abolition of slavery, and finally the great military general of France about the Napoleon Bonaparte and his military administration and the final battle of Waterloo. See you soon in the next session.